When you want the best, look for channels 45 and 49. WNEO Alliance and WEAO Akron.
Hi, I'm Rick Butz. Coming up next on Woodcarving, we'll be finishing up our Mule and Prospector project. So don't go away.
Woodcarving with Rick Butz is made possible by a grant from Woodcraft, suppliers of wood carving and woodworking tools through mail order catalogs and retail stores since 1928.
Hi, I'm Rick Butz. Welcome to Woodcarving. This week we're going to be finishing up our project we started last week with a prospector and his mule. Now what I've done since last week was I drilled a hole through the prospector's hand and just slipped a little piece of rope through there for the bridle. And then we'll be carving out the mule today. Now what I did was I took a piece of air-dried white pine, and you could also use basswood, and laid it out with a pattern and cut out with a bandsaw. Now, the thing to remember when you're laying this design out is keep the wood grain going parallel to the legs as much as you can. Now these legs are at an angle, so you're going to have to just compromise. But if you keep it going parallel to like these front grains, so the wood grain is going this way, then that's going to give you the maximum strength on these thin, delicate legs. If you're laid out the other way, then these legs will be very fragile and tend to break off when you're carving. Now, I've got my bench hook here, so it's just a matter of getting some large tools and roughing it out. I'm going to start with a large number 14 V tool. And this is a tool that's shaped, just like a V. Now, because the pack is the thickest part of the donkey, I'm going to outline that or cut around that with a V tool. And then I'm going to leave that side flat for a while and round it for one of my finishing touches. That'll give me something that I can hold in a vise later when I'm doing some other things here. Now this is an example of Western art, or cowboy art. And as we talked about last week, most of this early work was done by cowboys with just a pocket knife or what few simple tools they might have had. So the work has kind of a characteristic rough style to it. And it's what gives the pieces their own character and rugged individual feeling. This bench hook is handy because I can just brace the piece of wood right up here against it, and it doesn't slide around when I'm working. The thing you really want to be careful of when you're using a tool on a piece of wood like this is make sure it's secured somehow, so that you don't end up putting your hand on one side of the tool, of wood, to hold it, and then pushing the tool towards your hand, because that's a real good way to get hurt. So always make sure your wood is secure, and then keep both hands behind the cutting edge, and you won't have any problems. Now for roughing the rest of the donkey out here, I'm going to take a large number 2 gouge and just carve away a lot of this wood. I think the expression some of our wood carvers use is hogging off the wood. You just take away big chunks of wood. You know, mules are kind of an interesting animal and have sort of a strange reputation. A mule is the sterile hybrid of a male donkey and a mare. And mules have been bred for, well, since prehistoric time. And for some reason, the offspring of the donkey and the mare produces a very tough, durable animal. The old timers said that a mule was smarter than a horse, which that could be good or bad depending on whether or not you want an animal that can take care of himself or an animal where you have to worry about him being tricky. They can just rough this right out here. They had long, thin, delicate legs, and little small feet, so it made them very sure-footed. And of course, this was a real help to someone as a prospector who was out walking around out in the desert and rocky country looking for gold strikes or silver or whatever he could find. They also had long ears and a little tufted tail. They had several advantages over horses. They were very tough, small animals. They could hold up to a lot more heat than a horse could, so they're a much better desert animal. And also, they could eat a lot lower quality feed than a horse. So a donkey could survive on scrub and just about anything. So we're just roughing this down and bringing these pieces of wood down smaller. Now, one of the reputations that mules have is for being stubborn. There's the old expression, stubborn as a mule. And that might have been part of being smart, too. And understand it took a real good mule handler to work with a mule without making him, without bringing out the stubborn streak. Now, for doing the legs here, I roughed them out first because I was concerned about if these legs were very thin, the extra pressure in roughing these out might cause them to break off. So, now that I've got them roughed down to where I want it, draw a line here, and then I'll get my mallet. And the easiest way to do these rear legs is just to take the number 2 gouge, make a couple of vertical cuts down, then cut into it. And once again, I'm going to keep my hand behind that tool cutting edge. Yeah, that's just rough. That's all we need for now. Now I'll turn them around and do the other leg. You want to make sure when you're doing that you've got the right legs doing what they're supposed to do. This leg will come back and be on that leg. So I just double checked it to make sure my legs are going to work out right. And I'll do the same thing. I'll take and make a vertical cut with my gouge. Not too far or too much pressure here because that wood's starting to get thin. Then take and thin that down. You can also just press down by just rocking that tool back and forth in the wood, and you can very gently seesaw down through the fibers to make your cut. Now for doing the front legs, we'll use a coping saw. And that is a very thin-bladed saw that fits in a wire frame. And that'll make those very thin cuts down to the front of the legs. Now to do that, I'm going to hold them in the vise. And that's why we left that side of that pack flat, so that when you put them in the vise here, we have something to hold on to. cut this down. Now, because of the thin blade, this coping saw is set so that the blade cuts on the pull stroke. So the teeth are set so it cuts when it pulls. And that way you can get away with a much thinner blade. And that'll give us a break so we can cut that out later. Now it's just a simple matter of sitting down and doing some serious knife whittling. A lot of historians credit the mule for being the animal that helped build America. They're used not only by the prospectors, but they're also used for plow animals. They were used quite a bit in the Army. During the Civil War, they're a very durable pack animal. Even in the American Army, right up until World War II and the Korean War, they actually had special litters that were designed to fit on top of a mule to carry wounded people from the battlefront. Interestingly enough, in the 1930s, the Americans were experimenting with this new material called tungsten carbide. And one of the things that they were trying to do with it was find ways to make a more durable horseshoe and mule shoe with it. At the same time, there were some people in Europe that were trying to figure out ways to make armor-piercing cannon shells out of it. But it just goes to show how important the mule was to the history of our country. Now, I haven't had that much experience with mules myself, but I have been around some donkeys. One of the places that I like to go on vacation is down in the Caribbean, a place called St. John, where they have a national park, and you can camp out down there. Well, it turns out that many years ago, a lot of the donkeys that used to be used on the plantations were turned loose, and they're just wild down there now. And they'll come around to the campground, and the rangers try to caution people to leave them alone and not encourage the donkeys to come around. A lot of people, they're used to seeing animals like this in petting zoos and in tame circumstances. And these are actually wild animals. And they can bite. They can also give a pretty good kick. And the other thing, if they're encouraged to come around the campsite, they've been known to do things like stick their heads inside tents and eat traveler's checks and people's airline tickets and things like that. So they can be quite a nuisance. But they're cute animals. Interestingly enough, there were several donkeys, or mules rather, that were credited for discovering some of the major gold strikes. It wasn't always the prospector that was finding the gold. Sometimes it was the mule. One of the big strikes out west was at a place called Rich Hill. And the prospectors found that when they're out trying to round up some mules that had strayed off. They came across this field of gold. One of my favorite stories about a prospector called Henry Wickenburg. And he got in an argument with his mule about something or other. and ended up starting throwing rocks at it because the mule ran off and he was yelling at it. And started noticing how heavy these rocks were getting. He looked down, and it was gold. And started the Vulture Mine, which was one of the most prosperous mines in Arizona. Another one of my favorite stories about prospectors is a guy called Shorty Alger, who was out prospecting with his mule. He happened to slip down a rock embankment. He stuck his pickaxe in to slow him down, and lo and behold, came up with a gold nugget at the end of it that later weighed out to be half a pound of gold. So there's a strong association between the mule and the prospector. And for a lonely prospector out there in the middle of nowhere with all sorts of problems and harsh conditions, a mule was good company, and they would sometimes form a very close bond and really be good friends. Which is good because a mule lives much longer than a horse. A mule can live up to as long as 50 years, which is about twice the age a horse can live to. Now for shaping around the head here, I'm just going to narrow down his muzzle a little bit. And bring that down. When we have that rough shape, the next thing we need to do is set in the ears. And what I'm going to use for that is a couple of gouges. I'm going to pencil in approximately where the ear goes here. Then we can take either a V-tool or one of my favorites, is macaroni gouge. The box-shaped tool. And carve away the wood underneath the ear, which makes them look like they're raised a bit. And then we can come in and carve away the wood between the ear. Once we get that started, then we can just take a knife and finish it up. Just by cutting a series of progressively smaller notches, we can clear out that wood. Mules and horses were one of the favorite subjects for the Western woodcarvers because it was an animal that they were very familiar with. And they were so well acquainted with their mules, horses, that they could really capture the personality of them. It just really show up in the carvings. And like a lot of things, I think that's the secret of capturing personality in a wood carving, is just knowing your subject so well and having such a feeling for it that it just kind of comes out through your hands. Shape around its muzzle a little bit. Now for doing the eyes, we can use the same technique that we used on the prospector, which was figuring out about where the eyes are positioned. You may want to go to some reference material on this. And taking the knife and drawing a little half moon shape there for the upper eye, and another one for the lower eye, the lower part of the lid there. This one we're going to do it just a little bit different. We're going to come in shape it down. So that the animal kind of accentuates the shape of the eyebrow there. Because they have kind of a strong eyebrow that helps shade them from the sunlight. Cut it out a little bit there. And then we got a little chip. And we have our donkey staring back at us. Isn't that neat? Yeah, I love these. For the mouth, we can take our V-gouge, just bring that around, bring it around from the other side. I'm using a little V-gouge here. This is about a 3mm size. And for the nostril, make a little bit of a line to suggest the nostril there. And there's our donkey face. Isn't that neat? You get so much expression in them with just a few tools cut. Now we've got our donkey here to look back at us, we can start rounding off the rest of the cuts here. And the legs will just kind of smooth those over, and that's not going to be any big deal. You want to watch the changes in the wood grain on the legs, though. Because there's a couple of different curves on here, if when you're carving on the legs and you feel that tool start to dig in, particularly on the rear legs, because we're going, like this will be going with the grain here, and this way to go with the grain we'll have to cut back the other direction. But if you feel your tool starting to dig in and you're going against the grain, and you just reverse the direction of your tool. That's all there is to it. Now for the pack, I'm just going to shape a little more around here. And then, just take and round off the edges here. No big deal. I kind of save this part for last because that's really the easiest. And after you've got the face on the donkey, then it really comes up with a nice expression, and the whole personality of the carving starts taking shape. So just keep rounding this off. Remember, this doesn't have to be too neat. As I said, a lot of the cowboy art and the Western art, Ozark art, a lot of those wood carvings tend to be a little on the rough and the crude side. They don't sand them. They generally just leave the tool marks in there, and they're kind of chunky tool marks. This is a fun project to carve because it's not real difficult, and yet there's so many chances to get expression and build character into it. Oh, here's a trivia question for you, too. I said earlier that the mule was the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. Now, if it turns out the other way, and you have the offspring of a male horse and a female donkey, what is that called? Well, the answer is a hinny. It's a word that I've hardly ever heard, and not too many of them were bred because they weren't supposed to be quite as tough as a mule. Now, for doing the rope, we'll take our pencil and draw the lines around here. Crisscross. And then take either a V-tool or a macaroni tool or whatever, and on each side of that line, about a 1/16 of an inch apart, incise another line. And that leaves sort of a raised groove there, which will look like rope. cutting the one that goes under it, you just bring the tool up to where that other cross section starts and then just stop it right there. You've already got a cut there, so the wood will most likely just stop and won't splinter beyond through it. Bring it up around through here. Then the texture of the rope, just take your small V tool and just carve some diagonal lines in that. And that'll give it the appearance of rope. And so on. And that's really all there is to it. A nice simple project that in an evening or two you can finish up and really know that you've got something. Now, you can see the effect of the rope over here. I've just kind of gone around it and then painted a little bit differently. Now for the tail, what I've done is took a small scrap of wood and just whittled that to make the shape of the tufted tail and then glued it into place. Now, for the shovel and the axe, I just whittle those out a little piece of wood, drill the hole in the pack, and they just slide right in there. And that's really all there is to it. And then, when you get it all done, you take a little piece of string for a bridle so your mule won't stray off, and you're all set. Now for painting, I just use the oil paint thinned out with turpentine again, a little white and burnt umber, and it gives a nice gray sheen that the mules have. A neat little project. Hey, next week, we're going to be doing something, one of my favorite owls, and this is a screech owl. And we'll be going through that, and I'll be showing you all different ways that you can detail that and make it look very realistic. Well, thanks for dropping by. I've had a lot of fun. Until next week, I'm Rick Butz wishing you happy carving.
Wood carving with Rick Butz is made possible by a grant from Woodcraft, suppliers of wood carving and woodworking tools through mail order catalogs and retail stores since 1928.
As a companion to this series, a complete set of plans and instructions for all the projects featured is available. Through this handy workshop edition of his personal plans and instructions, Rick Butz will lead you through the stages of creating your very own carvings. The full-size plans will make cutting blanks simple. For your copy of Contemporary American Wood Carving Plans and Instructions, call 1-800-950-WMHT.